Good afternoon. I am Allison Weber, a partner here at Tully Rinckey, and uh, I'm just going to give you kind of an outline of what's important in determining how to go about getting bad paper removed from your records. And what you'll find out is that the 5 Ws play a critical role in determining where to go and what to file, how to file it. That's going to be the most important thing, is determining that first piece. So just to start out with the who. What branch of the military are you in? Are you active, reserve, guard? And are you still in some capacity? So where you go to change your records to try to have things removed changes depending on those answers. If you've already retired, for instance, you can't go to the same boards to remove records as you can if you're still on active duty. That's a critical piece of information. So no matter how you're looking at it, you have to make sure your status is part of the assessment, because otherwise you will waste a lot of time filing a petition to the wrong place. The next question is pretty simple. What bad paper do you want to get rid of? And some of the branches are very specific on how to go about doing this. When it's an evaluation, you go to one board. When it's a reprimand, letter of admonition, letter of concern, anything that was permanently filed that is more reprimandish, you go to a different area. If it's just an adverse investigation, so for instance, in the Army, an AR-15-6 investigation that is substantiated against you, that is going to stay in your records unless you go to remove it. And whether that led to something else also plays into where you go to request relief. Or is this something else entirely? There could be anything that lands in your official personnel file that you want out for some particular reason. So that is a key question, is what do you want removed? Each thing falls under a different regulation for how you're going to go about doing that. And while some people will say the default is just to go to the Board for Corrections, whether that's the Army, Air Force, or the BCNR, that's a mistake, because you cannot go there until you've already exhausted all of your options first. So jumping to that is going to be a very long process, because you're going to send it to them, they'll sit on it for a really long time, and then they'll kick it back to you saying you didn't exhaust your options first, now go back and do that. So that's the last thing you want to do, is have to do effectively a do-over and have it sit for a year in the meantime. When was the paper put in your file? That's another question. So one of the questions for an evaluation is, has it been filed? Is it still pending filing? That's a key as to where you can go to get it removed. A reprimand, if it is permanently filed, once it's filed, that's where the clock starts in terms of trying to have it removed. And what's happened since then? So for example, the Department of Army Suitability and Evaluation Board requires that certain things happen after the record. So have you had another rating since the piece of paper you're trying to get removed? Have you already tried to pursue reconsideration through some other means? Was there, so for instance, if it's an investigation, one of the most crucial things is, was action taken in response to the investigation? That dramatically changes it, because an investigation can be removed in and of itself, but if there was action taken in response to it, now you can no longer just push to remove the investigation. You have to push to remove both at the same time. So it becomes a little complicated in terms of when it was filed, and also there's a limit, right? So if you had an evaluation filed, we'll say 6 years ago, you can't go straight to, or you can't go to the normal route of going to the DASEB or ERAB. You have to go to the corrective process because you waited too long. So there's windows of time where you can go to each thing. Obviously, one of the most obvious here is trying to avoid the bad paper in the first place. So I encourage everyone to file substantive rebuttals to any negative paperwork that they're being faced with, because you want to set the stage either to get it removed to stop it from being filed or to set the stage for it being removed later, trying to make the dominoes fall into place so that it is easier when you get to these corrective actions. One of the things that you can do going to the where is first and foremost the commander, right? So the commander who's issuing the evaluation, the commander who's issuing the reprimand, the commander who is approving the investigation, they all have the ability to make changes, withdraw actions, and essentially grant you relief up to a point. So they're your first avenue to try to get relief. Now, once it goes in, so if they decide to permanently file your GOMAR and they've already sent it to HRC, for instance, they now have lost their control, right? They filed it permanently against you. They've already told HRC this, so they can't now just undo it, rescind it themselves. Instead, they could only write you a letter of support to have it withdrawn from your records. And in that letter, they would have to explain why they're agreeing. Is it because they shouldn't have issued it in the first place? You're not going to get very many commanders to admit that. Or is it because it's served its purpose? So you want to start with them. They may or may not still have the authority by the time they listen to you and consider the action, but you start with your command. And if nothing else, you might be able to get command support if you're going to one of these other levels. Even if you don't, though, that shouldn't dissuade you. You should still pursue relief at the other levels. So some of the most widely used is just going to HRC for the Army, AFPC for the Air Force, going to PERSCOM, for instance. You could try with the Navy, although the Navy has its own, they do a lot more with the command and they have a lot less things that get filed permanently in the same way. So that's a little bit different, but that's one of the, again, one of the questions you start with is what branch and component are you in, because that's going to direct you. So HRC is where you're going to go for purposes of filing your removal of an evaluation. DASEB, ERAB, that's where you're going to go to file removal of other adverse information. Each regulation, again, is going to tell you where to start. And so that's the critical point, is going through the 5 W's, filling it out, and then figuring what regulation or instruction applies to your given situation. It will tell you where to first file. It will tell you what you need to file. And it will tell you what the alternate courses are after that. In most cases, again, the regulations aren't all written as well as they could be, but that is the general idea, is get that as the starting point, and then you can go from there on additional research. The last place that you go is the boards for correction. So the ABCMR for Army, AFBCMR for Air Force, or the BCNR for the Navy and Marines. One thing you need to know about that process is it's a lengthy process. All of the boards are indicating it's at least 12 to 18 months once the petition gets to them. So again, you don't want to start there, you want to end there, and only if you have to. But that is one of the places that most people do end up at, especially if they haven't put a lot of thought into the underlying actions. So not saying everybody necessarily needs an attorney when they're filing something, but you do have to lay out your position very clearly on what you are trying to do, why you're trying to do it, and why they should agree to support that. Another piece in explaining why is, and in finding out where to go, is like, what is it about the negative information that you're trying to have removed? There are different standards depending on why you're trying to remove it. So there's, for instance, if your evaluation has some administrative errors, that most likely would not be a reason to remove an entire evaluation if it's just minor administrative errors. But if the evaluation has, for instance, prohibited comments or completely inaccurate information that has substantive value, now you're talking about something that they're going to get more detailed and in-depth in looking into. If you do have administrative errors, you can still seek correction of those on an evaluation, but you're not necessarily going to get it removed. One of the most important things, though, is what's in this negative bad paper. Is it, like I said, is it inaccurate? Is it that they wrote you, for instance, a reprimand, and they wrote it for 3 different things, but investigation actually proved you only did 2 of the things? The fact that they included the 3rd is still concerning, because if you've been exonerated of that, that should not be in your reprimand anymore. So you can have things modified, or you can attempt to remove it. A redacted reprimand is still better than an inaccurate one. Prohibited comments, that goes more towards evaluations. Did the evaluator, the reviewing officer, any of the people in your chain put comments in there that are not allowed to be in there by regulation? So saying you got an Article 15 for something, pick an offense, right? You got an Article 15 for disobeying an order, and you got 45 and 45. They can't write that out like that. That's not how that's supposed to go. They can mention that you got an Article 15, although even that they're not really supposed to get into. Instead, they're just supposed to say that there was underlying misconduct and go into that, right? Unsubstantiated information. If you had an investigation done against you and it was limited to theft, if they go in and put in comments such as soldier failed to comply with the rules, was non-cooperative during the investigation, actively thwarted attempts by the investigator, that would be problematic, because all of those are unsubstantiated allegations. They weren't part of the investigation. They can't be made by the commandant in an evaluation. So that type of stuff, if they start throwing in what I like to say are little dings against the person being evaluated, you can actually use those against them. Sometimes they don't even realize they're giving you the grounds to remove something that they otherwise had good cause to write a bad evaluation for. So what else is in there other than the actual information of what you did that warranted the evaluation, for instance? So we talked about prohibited comments, administrative errors. Oh, the prejudicial impact. Is this a situation where simply you've had this bad paper in your file for a while and you have proven yourself time and time again for the years after that, that you do an outstanding job? This was one slip up in your life, it's an anomaly, and this shouldn't forever impact your career. That is a basis to request removal. Is it always going to work? Not always, but it's definitely something that you would want to push for. And the reason you still want to push for is because when do these things come back up? They come back up in promotion review boards. When you're being considered for promotion, you can have outstanding evaluations, but if they see the bad paper, you very well might get passed over. And that could trigger a number of actions. For officers, it could trigger a mandatory elimination action. It could trigger a Q&P board on the enlisted side. There's a lot of different things that can happen years after the incident that, again, gave rise to the bad paper. And getting these things removed before that takes place is one of the best things you can do to protect yourself. You can't do it necessarily instantaneously. If that is your reasoning, I want this so it doesn't follow me forever, you're not going to be able to remove it the day after it's filed by any means. But you also do want to pursue it before you're facing that negative action. Like I said, an elimination action for being passed over. You don't want to sit on your request until you're already pending elimination. So these are all key components. I know I'm actually talking really fast through just the 5 W's here, but that's the basic idea of what you need to know. If you want to remove bad paper from your records, you need to identify yourself. What's your branch, component, and status? Are you still in? Are you not? If you're not in, you are going to be going to the boards for corrections, most likely. There's very limited areas that you could go elsewhere. Again, what are you having removed? Is it the entirety of the document? Is it just you want a comment stricken from it? and what type of document is it. And they follow you in different ways. So in different branches, they also follow you different ways. So all of those are important things to consider in the assessment of where you're going to go and how you're going to go about doing this. When to file it, as I said, you can't necessarily file to remove something the day after, although if it's erroneous, if it contains prohibited comments and inaccurate information, you can. But for the other reasons, not necessarily. You need to give it a little bit of time. You want to prove that you've overcome whatever incident gave rise to the bad paper, but you don't want to sit on it for a decade before you decide to address the matter. Typically, the answer is you want to file it within 3 years of the incident that triggered it. I mean, that's normally a good ballpark to think about, is somewhere in that time. And then again, just going back to why. One thing I do want to highlight here, a bad evaluation has to actually be a bad evaluation. It can't just be they didn't give me a great evaluation, I did way better than what they indicated. It has to actually be a negative. They have to mark no on something. They have to mark it's referred. They have to relieve you from something. There has to be some actual substantive negative piece to it. I mean, if there's a prohibited comment, again, that would count as well. But if it's just they didn't give you a glowing report, you're not going to have luck trying to get that removed or corrected in this process. You have to fight that battle with your rater up front. So those are all the things you have to factor in. And then, like I said, the next thing you do is either turn to the regulations to find out your next steps or hire an attorney so they can do it. And, jump in, hit the ground running and file those petitions and continue pursuing it up through the different options, because typically once you finish one, you can go to the next. And that's why the BCNR and BCMRs are the last course of action, because they want you to exhaust all other avenues before you go to them. And you do too. As I said, you're going to be sitting for a really long time waiting for them to get back to you. So that is kind of your last ditch effort to get something out of your records, and you want to put all of your effort into that. If you make it to that point, you don't want to be filing a request for reconsideration with them. It makes it 10 times harder on you to prove your burden if you're filing a second, a third, fourth time. You want to get it right the first time. So that's the gist of kind of how to figure out the details of where to go, what to do, and how to go about doing this. And you do want to emphasize not only what's wrong about the evaluation and why it should be removed, but also the prejudicial impact it's having on you. How is it going to continue to affect you? Is it going to be the end of your military career if they leave it there? That is something you want to highlight, because not everyone thinks that through when they're on the other side of this. Same thing when you're going back and lobbying your command, maybe for support to remove something. They may give you a reprimand and think, okay, it's just a reprimand, it's not a big deal. They don't necessarily realize that that can lead to you being QMP'd 5 years later. So a lot of times it is worth going back and trying to get command support too. The prejudicial impact is a key component of why you can request removal and why they should do it. So those are all things that I think are important in addressing how to get the bad paper out of your file. But like I said, this is the abbreviated webinar, just kind of giving you the overview. So I don't know if anybody has any general questions about that. If so.
If there are any questions for Allison, please submit them via the chat. I'll give everybody a minute to submit those. There doesn't seem to be any questions, Allison.
Okay, well, that was a very speedy version then. If you do have specific questions about a particular record you want removed or how to go about doing it, you can certainly reach out to the firm and set up a consult with the military practice group. That is always an option. So I wish you all the best of luck for anybody who is trying to get rid of bad paper. Have a great rest of your day.